بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. Welcome you back to our course on Safinat al-Naja, Imam al-Hadrami's primer on beginner Shafi'i jurisprudence. Our topic at present is Kitab al-Tahara, or the Book of Cleanliness, and we've covered a number of topics within the subject or this subheading of Tahara, including the types of water, ablution, the causes of minor ritual impurity, using the lavatory or istinja, purificatory bathings with the ghusl. Dry ablution we'll cover in this lesson, menstruation follows, and impurities as well. طيب, our basis from or for this particular topic from the Quran, firstly, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا, we had sent down purifying water from the heavens. From the Sunnah, various ahadith, مفتاح الجنة الصلاة ومفتاح الصلاة الطهور. The keys to paradise is the prayer, and the keys to the prayer are the processes of purification. This lesson, bi'idhnillah, we will look at forbidden actions in minor and major impure state. So basically, what can you not do when you don't have a wudu? What can you not do when you don't have a ghusl? And also we'll include there, what can you not do while in a state of menstruation? So this is why we are calling it forbidden actions in these various states. Also in this lesson are various topics related to Tayammum or dry ablution, the 3 causes of Tayammum, the 10 conditions of Tayammum, 5 integrals and 3 nullifiers. Khairan, so let us commence. Bidnillahi ta'ala, we are looking at فيما يحرم على المحدث. What are the things that are prohibited for a person who is a muhdith? Now a muhdith means a person who does not have wudu. They are in a state of non-ablution. So what can they not do? Which actions are haram for them? So the Musannif, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, مَنْ انتقض وضوءه, whosoever's wudu or ablution is broken, حرم عليه أربعة أشياء, 4 things become impermissible upon that person. الصلاة, prayer, والطواف, which is circumambulation of the Kaaba, وَمَسُّ الْمُصْحَفِ, and touching the Mus'haf, the Quran, وَحَمْلُهُ, and carrying the Mus'haf. So these are the 4 factors or the 4 actions that we are not allowed to do when we don't have ablution. The most common reason for you to need ablution is for prayer. So salah, you cannot perform salah without having ablution. Tawaf is circumambulating or walking around the Kaaba, which of course you can only do in Mecca for Hajj or Umrah, or just supererogatory tawaf, but all of which requires a full ablution, because tawaf is basically like salah, except that you can move and you can speak therein. The third one is touching the Quran, right? So based on various ayat and ahadith, there is unanimity among the scholars of the traditional madhahib of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that touching the Mus'haf requires ablution. And this is the same whether it is touching the cover or the words in the inside or the blank parts of the pages, etc. Of course, there are other questions in relation to what is and isn't a Mus'haf. So I'll try to simplify this, inshallah ta'ala. First and foremost, a Mus'haf is that which the entire Quran is written down in. So basically from the beginning of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim till the end of Surah An-Nas, that in one book or one compilation is referred to as a Mus'haf, to simplify the explanation. The question now comes in, what about translation Qurans? What about apps and the like? So the fuqaha of the Shafi'i school look at the percentage. If more than 50% of the contents of a particular book is Quran, then it will be considered as Quran. So if it is a translation of the Quran, so that there is the Arabic and then explanation as well, chances are that the explanation in a different language is going to outnumber the amount of Arabic words. And as such, this will not be categorized as a mushaf per se, but rather as a tafsir. So it is permissible to touch that even without wudu. And the same principle applies to apps on the phone. The idea is, look, even though the entire Quran can be called up onto the screen of the phone, it is done so in piecemeal. So it's just that text on the screen at that time that is Quran, but the rest of the thing in your hand is not a mushaf. So one doesn't need to touch, one doesn't need wudu to touch one's phone. And then if you do call up an app, it is advised, though not necessarily obligatory, that you touch the Arabic wording on the screen with ablution if it can be avoided without ablution. طيب, and there are a number of questions like this, but you can refer to our answer service for more of that. So that's massul mushafi, which is the touching of the mushaf. And then as the fourth and additional point, the author says, وَحَمْلُهُ, and carrying the Quran. So if you look at footnote number 39, it says it is not permissible to touch the Quran, whether it's writing, its spaces between its lines, its margins, binding, the carrying strap attached to it, or the bag or box it is in. However, it is permissible to carry a Quran in baggage and to carry money, rings, or clothes on which Quran is written. So there you have it. Now we move on to the next state, the next purificatory state, which is the absence of the ghusl. So we refer to the absence of ghusl, or the state of major ritual impurity. We refer to this as janaba. And the person in the state of janaba is referred to as a junub. So if you look at the text, it says, وَيَحْرُمُ عَلَى الْجُنُبِ, and it is haram upon the person in a state of major ritualistic impurity. سِتَّةُ أَشْيَاءَ, 6 things are haram. الصلاة والطواف ومس المصحف وحمله. So here you will notice that the first 4 are exactly the same as this list over here, which means that the things you cannot do without wudu, you cannot do without ghusl as well. However, you do see an additional 2 factors mentioned here that are not mentioned for the person who doesn't have wudu, and they are وَاللُّبْثُ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ, to remain in the mosque. So a person in a state of ritualistic impurity or janaba cannot remain in a mosque. Note the difference between remaining in a mosque, which means to actually pause there, sit down there, become comfortable, and passing through or entering a mosque. So by specifying remaining in a mosque, we understand that a person may enter the mosque or pass through the mosque, even though they may be in a state of janaba, but they cannot remain in the mosque. Then the 5th point, or the 6th point rather, number 6, وَقِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ, the recitation of Quran. So we've already covered touching the mushaf, we've covered carrying the mushaf. Here it is even the recitation of the Quran. From this we can also understand that a person without wudu may not touch the mushaf or carry the mushaf, but they can recite Quran. So they can recite from memory, or they can recite from an app, or they can recite from a translation Quran or a tafsir, etc. And that would be completely valid. But as for the junub, the person in a state of janaba, they may not recite the Quran. If it's a supplication and there happens to be a passage of the Quran within the supplication, that's okay. But they cannot recite Quran, even if it is as a means of dhikr or protection. They can use the other forms of protection, though if I recall correctly, there is some difference of opinion about that per se, which is using the Quran as a protection. Some would say it's permissible, even though you do not have a ghusl. Then we move on to the 3rd state of impurity, which is وَيَحْرُمُ بِالْحَيْضِ عَشَرَةُ أَشْيَاءَ. What is haram with menstruation? With menstruation, 10 things become haram. As-salatu wa-tawafu wa-mashu al-mushafi wa-hamluhu. So the same as before, exactly the same first 4 components. And then in addition, وَاللُّبْثُ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ وَكِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ. So here, this is exactly the same as the junub. So the same 6 things haram for a person in a state of janaba are also haram for a person in a state of hayd. But in addition to those 6 things, it is also haram for a lady in her hayd to was-sawmu, fast, wat-talaqu, or to be divorced, right? I'll comment on that in a moment. Wal-mururu fil masjid, and to pass through a mosque. So this is not remaining, but to pass through the mosque in khafat talwithahu, if she fears that she will soil the mosque. Wal-istimta'u bima bayna surrati wa rukbati, and to engage in foreplay with what lies between the navel and the knees. Okay, so there is some commentary required here. The first 6 elements that are haram for a lady in a state of menstruation, they are clear because they are the same as the person in a state of junub. In addition to that, to fast. So a lady in a state of hayd should not fast. It is haram for her to fast. It is not that she is missing out on the fasting. She is actually prohibited from fasting. So by abstaining from fasting, she's obeying the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's important for us to understand. It's not that they are not practicing Allah's law of fasting. It is rather they are practicing Allah's law of not fasting because they are in a state of hayd. Then we said talaq. So this confuses some students. It is haram for a husband to divorce his wife while she is in the state of hayd, or while she is in her clean period if he has engaged in sexual intercourse during that particular clean period. So saying that it is haram for him to do so means that if he does so, he will be liable for punishment for having committed a haram. However, the talaq that he issued will still be valid, even though his issuing of that talaq during that time was haram. The talaq itself is still completely valid, and she would have to engage in, or rather enter into iddah. So it is not to say that the talaq would not be valid. It is simply saying that while she has a hayd, it is haram for a husband to divorce his wife. But the talaq would be valid, and Allah knows best. Then we said passing through the masjid, but only if she fears soiling the mosque. Now, with contemporary sanitary measures, if a lady is prepared for a hayd, it's a different story if she's unprepared. What happens sometimes is a lady didn't expect to get a hayd, and then all of a sudden she has blood flow. Usually it starts off slow, so she's able to know that the blood flow is picking up, and she would take care of it. And of course, if she didn't know in any case and she finds herself in the mosque, she has to leave at that point. But other than that, if a woman is prepared for a hayd, knowing that it's a hayd, generally speaking, there's no fear of soiling the mosque because of modern sanitary measures. So this passing through the mosque will not be prohibited because she doesn't have such a fear. If she does have such a fear, of course, the law applies. As far as the 4 madhahib are concerned, the preponderant view of all 4 madhahib stands united that a woman in a state of hayd may not remain in the masjid. Are there some solitary views permitting it? Yes, there are. Not particularly strong or not particularly frequently found in the Shafi school, but there are. In some of the other schools, there are opinions such as that. But as far as the safer bet is concerned, or the safer approach is concerned, I would say rather cater for the ladies by having a special wing of the masjid that is not intended as masjid when it is built, and allow that space for the women if such a need exists. But I believe this law to be something that we shouldn't really. There's no need to find. There's no need to find views outside of the four madahib, or views that are not really strong in the four madahib. I cannot speak about the strength of these views, but they do exist, and some people practice upon it, and they are permitted to do so, and Allah knows best. And then the final point here is وَالْإِسْتِمْتَاعُ بِمَا بَيْنَ السُّرَّةِ وَالرُّكْبَةِ. Istimta'u is to engage in foreplay with anything between the navel and the knees, right? And there's some differences of opinion with exactly what is prohibited here. Some scholars say no, only the front and rear private part is prohibited, while others, the more strict approach, as you can see here, is that between the navel and the knees, that should be avoided, but any sexual gratification that takes place from outside of that area of the body would still be permitted, even though she has a hayd. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So that covers the first section. Now we move on to the section on tayammum. So what I'll do now, I'll read through all of the text, right? So you can get familiar with what the text is saying. I will not translate it here, but then proceed to cover it section for section bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So let us proceed. Faslun fi asbab tayammumi, regarding the causes of tayammum, right? What would cause tayammum? Asbab tayammumi thalathatun. فقد الماء والمرض والاحتياج إليه لعطش حيوان محترم. وغير المحترم ستة: تارك الصلاة والزاني والمحصن والمرتد والكافر الحربي والكلب العقور والخنزير. فصل في شروط التيمم. شروط التيمم 10: أن يكون بتراب، وأن يكون التراب طاهرا، وأن لا يكون مستعملا، وأن لا يخالطه دقيق ونحوه، وأن يقصده، وأن يمسح وجهه ويديه بضربتين، وأن يزيل النجاسة أولا، وأن يجتهد في القبلة قبله، وأن يكون التيمم بعد دخول الوقت، وأن يتيمم لكل فرض. فصل في فرائض التيمم. فروض التيمم 5: الأول نقل التراب، الثاني النية، الثالث مسح الوجه، الرابع مسح اليدين إلى المرفقين، الخامس الترتيب بين المسحتين. فصل في مبطلات التيمم. مبطلات التيمم 3: ما أبطل الوضوء، والردة، وتوهم الماء إن تيمم لفقده. طيب, so that is the entire segment of Arabic text. So let's cover them section at a time, inshallah. The first section will be regarding the causes of tayammum. So what would happen, or what would need to take place in order for you to need to perform tayammum, okay? The causes of tayammum, أسباب التيمم ثلاثة, there are 3. Number 1, فقد الماء, either you don't have water. Number 2, والمرض, or there's illness, so you cannot use water for some reason or the other. And number 3, والاحتياج إليه لعطش حيوان محترم, or you have water, but you need the water to quench the thirst of honored creatures, right? So this is an interesting one. Then the author goes on to say, وَغَيْرُ الْمُحْتَرَمِ سِتَّةٌ, right? And then he tells us who is or dishonorable creatures, right? Creatures who don't have honor. But before we get there, so let's just look at it. If you have no water, you would need to perform tayammum. If you are ill, so there is water, but you are unable to utilize the water because of your illness. So you are too weak to get to the water, for example, or you would be damaging your health or potentially harming yourself by using the water, or you fear because you've got some sort of a disease, so you fear utilizing the water. There are, whichever illness causes you to be unable to use the water. The number 3 is the interesting one, where he says you may have water, but you may need to reserve the water for drinking purposes, but specifically for honored animals or honored creatures. So now we will speak about who are the dishonorable creatures. But before we do that, under the note of absence of water, the author says if there is a little water that is insufficient for attaining purity, water should be used as much as possible, and then tayammum should be performed for the rest of the limbs. So let's say the water shuts down and in the whole town there's no water. So of course, people are going to have drinking water, and if you've reserved some water for tayammum. Okay, so assume you have no other water except maybe one jug, but you know that that jug is half filled, so you won't be able to get through an entire wudu with that. Should you go straight to the tayammum? The answer is no, you should first use the water that you have for the sake of purification. And once that water is used, if you don't have a full ablution by that point, then you can perform tayammum. But you first have to get through that water, right? And you may find it confusing. So what's the point of that? Why can't you just go straight to the tayammum? And the answer is because tayammum is only valid if there is the genuine reason. And if there is water, then the genuine reason of absence of water has not yet been realized. طيب. Then number 41, an ailment that a person fears water would cause: harm to life or limb, disability, becoming seriously ill, an increase in one's ailment, a delay in recovering from one's illness, considerable pain, or a bad effect from the water, such as a radical change in one's skin color or a visible part of the body. These are examples, but of course there may be others as well. Then number 42, there is fear of one's own thirst or that of worthy companions and animals with one, even if it be in the future. Now, this next part, وَغَيْرُ الْمُحْتَرَمِ, dishonorable or unworthy creatures are sittatun, or 6. Listen to this list and observe and take a lesson from it, inshallah. Number 1, tarikus salah, a person who had forsaken their prayer. Number 2, wazani al-muhsan, a convicted married adulterer. الثالث, number 3, al-murtad, an apostate. Number 4, al-kafiru, but specifically al-kafiru al-harbiyu, a disbeliever who is from a country that is at war with a Muslim country, right? So not just disbelievers in general, but specifically a disbeliever that is from a country or who supports a country that is at war with a Muslim country. Number 5, wal kalbul aqur, a vicious dog. I would say rather a rabid dog. It's not just because a dog is vicious that he would be unworthy, but if the dog is rabid and dangerous and is a hazard to people's health, then of course that would be included. And then number 6, wal khinzir, right, the pig. Now this is not these points are not trying to say that these individuals are worthless or condemned to hell or whatever the case may be. No. This is it's just a very interesting point that here, if you have to make the choice between giving a dog, or rather giving a pig some water to drink, or using the water for ablution, then according to this list, you should rather use the water for ablution and allow the pig to die. There's of course differences of opinion among the scholars about these matters here, as to the approach that one should take. But with this hypothetical scenario in front of us, that is what the author has put forward, and Allah knows best. I would say that there's a lesson to be taken from this, because these are serious crimes, not the creatures now, but the people. They are serious crimes, and Islam doesn't take it lightly. And if you read what should happen to a person who doesn't perform salah at the beginning of Kitab al-Salah, it's quite striking. But in reality, you have to look at the rahmah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the rahmah of a believer. And I think any believer who has a heart in times of drought or severe drought, that somebody would give a human some water to drink rather than to use that water for the istinja, for example, and Allah knows best. So, take the lesson from this, inshallah ta'ala, but let's not be too literalist about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. طيب, we move on. شروط التيمم 10. The conditions of tayammum are 10. أن يكون بتراب, it must be with dust, right, with earth. So it cannot be with soil, compost, um, anything that is powder of some sort. It needs to be of the earth. It does not matter whether the earth is red, black, yellow, or salty, in which nothing grows. It is not permissible to perform tayammum with earth that has been turned to ashes, or with clay, pottery that has been pounded and softened. Number 2, وَأَن يَكُونَ التُّرَابُ طَاهِرًا. The earth must be pure, meaning it must be free of filth, of najasa. وَأَن لَا يَكُونَ مُسْتَعْمَلًا. It must not be used earth. So in other words, it must not have come from a tayammum of somebody else, and the dust that was collected from their limbs is now to be utilized a second time. No, that would be used earth. It must be clean earth. وَأَن لَا يُخَالِطُهُ دَقِيقٌ وَنَحْوُهُ. It should not be mixed with flour or saffron or any other type of substance. It needs to be pure earth. Number 5, وَأَن يَقْصِدَهُ. The person performing tayammum should be deliberate in their actions. So they must actually go down to collect the earth, or they must actually scoop the earth, whatever the case may be. So reach it, take control over it, take ownership of it. It should not be such that they haphazardly come into contact with the earth. So let's say the strong wind comes and picks up some sand, and then they place their limbs there with the intention of tayammum. That's the earth coming to them. You should actually go to the earth. You should go to the ground and intend it. So that's what is meant by number 5. وَيَمْسَحَ وَجْهَهُ وَيَدَيْهِ. And then he should make mash, or wipe, his face and his hands. Here the word hands, because hand in Arabic could refer to just the hand. It could refer to the hand till here. It could even refer to, till here. So one needs to contextualize what is meant by the word hand. Here, the context, we know it means the hand ila al-mirfaqain, so up to and including the elbows. Even though there's differences of opinion about that, some scholars suffice with just the hands itself. But for the Shafi'i school, it's up to and including the elbows. So وَأَن يَمْسَحَ وَجْهَهُ وَيَدَيْهِ بِضَرْبَتَيْن. To wipe the face and the hands with 2 strikes. Striking meaning to strike the earth. So you have some earth that you've collected or that you're going down towards, then you have to heat it once. That would be for the first wipe, which is going to be for the face. Then you heat it again. That would be for the second wipe, which is going to be for the arms. وَأَن يُزِيلَ النَّجَاسَةَ أَوَّلًا. And number 7 is to first remove any filth. So if a person had some filth on their person, some najasa, that they should first remove the filth and then perform the tayammum. But at the same time, okay, let's leave that for now. وَأَن يَجْتَهِدَ فِي الْقِبْلَةِ قَبْلَهُ. He should try to ascertain the direction of the qibla, or the prayer direction, before performing tayammum. So this is a recommendation because the preferred view is that tayammum will be correct if it has been performed after the time of the salah had entered, even before a person determines the direction of the qibla, and Allah knows best. وَأَن يَكُونَ التَّيَمُّمُ بَعْدَ دُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ. And that the tayammum should take place after the time of the waqt had entered. So tayammum is not something that can be performed ahead of time, like wudu. You can only perform the tayammum once the waqt of the prayer had entered. In other words, the exact time of the prayer had commenced. Even if the adhan is still, in progress, you may perform tayammum at that point. And then number 10, وَأَن يَتَيَمَّمَ لِكُلِّ فَرْضٍ. One requires a new, fresh tayammum for every fard prayer, even if they maintain the state of tayammum from the previous prayer. However, several sunnahs may be prayed with the same fard, with that same tayammum, whether it's before or after the fard, Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So those are the conditions of the tayammum. And yes, of course, you may be wondering, so how does one actually perform the tayammum? We'll get to that in a moment. Furudu tayammumi, the integrals, in other words, the components of the tayammum are 5, khamsatun. Al-awwalu naqlu turabi. The first integral is the transfer of the earth to the body. Therefore, it will not suffice to merely pass the hands over the face or arms with the intention of tayammum when they already have dust on them, right? So let's say you're walking in the desert and you have sand on your hands and you have sand on your arms. That is not going to suffice. You need to actually transfer the sand. So you need to go down and collect sand, transfer that sand with one strike. So imagine I'm striking the sand here. I strike the sand. And now I'm going to wipe my face with that. And that would be wiping the face. Then the second strike again, that would now be for the hand. So you would wipe the left hand over the right, like that. And you'd wipe the right over the left, like that. And that's it. That's basically the tayammum. So now with that in mind, the first one is naqlu turab, transferring the sand. The second one is an-niyya. So for every act of ibadah in the Shafi school, the niyyah is going to be one of the integrals. How do you make the niyyah? In your heart, in your mind, you're acutely conscious of what it is that you are doing. You're not just happening to be there and, touching the sand or whatever the case may be. You are deliberate in your actions. الثالث مسح الوجه, wiping the face, the same area that would be wiped in wudu, though it is not necessary for the sand to cover the face as the water covers the face. Like if your face doesn't need to be super dusty like you had a mask on, as long as fairly dusty hands touches the face. Now remember, when you strike the earth also, it's not rubbing earth onto your hands. You have dusty earth that you hit, and your hitting of the earth produces enough dust for this process. It's basically symbolic. It's not actually removing any filth. So you strike the earth, that's enough dust that gets transferred onto your hands. That dust, you still have to knock it off. It's sunnah to also just knock it off once and then rub the earth. So clearly, the point is not to get as much dust onto one's face and arms as possible. It is symbolic in a sense and also has some physical attributes from a different perspective. In terms of thoroughness, it's a usual wipe. You cannot, sand and water are different elements, so they're not going to act the same, right? So you don't have to cover it like that. As long as you did the wipe, that would be sufficient. Then الرابع, the fourth, مسح اليدين إلى المرفقين, wiping the hands till the elbows, up to and including the elbows, basically the same area as the wudu. And then والخامس, the fifth, الترتيب بين المسحتين, preserving the sequence between the two wipes. So first the face and then the arms, and one following the other. The intention of making salah permissible, it will not suffice to make the intention of removing hadath. Okay, so this is an important point as well. It's a bit of a technicality. But if you're going to intend, you don't intend to take wudu. It's not the same as the intention of wudu. The intention is tayammum, right? To make salah permissible. And if you confused about this, then just intend that you are performing tayammum so that you can make salah, and that's sufficient. But it is not to remove the state of hadath, nor is it to perform wudu, because it is not a wudu, and Allah knows best. Then it is not necessary to make the earth reach the skin under the hair of the face and arms. It is, however, necessary to pass the hands over that part of the beard which is visible. And then lastly, it is necessary to pass the hand over the face before passing them over the arms. That is the sequence that must be observed, and that is your tayammum. So if you put everything together, we've got the causes of tayammum, which is absence of water, or it was absence of water, or it is illness of some sort, or it is presence of water but need for the water for a honored creature. And then we had the conditions of tayammum, which were 10. And if you don't need to memorize that list necessarily, it would be good too. But if you understand that list, then that would be great. So make sure that those 10 components are observed. And then you have the integrals of the tayammum, which are 5. It is the transfer of sand, then the niyyah or the intention, the wiping of the face, the wiping of the arms, and in that sequence. So there are your 5 things. And then finally, you need to know what breaks the tayammum. So let's go to that now, inshallah ta'ala. Mubtilatu tayammumi, the factors that break the tayammum or the nullifiers of tayammum, thalathatun are 3. Ma abtala al-wudu'a, that which nullifies the ablution. So we've just learned about that at the beginning of this lesson. Number 2, ar-riddatu, apostasy. So basically leaving the fold of Islam. I think that's an obvious one. I'm not actually quite sure why the author specified this point here, but it would be interesting to see. And then number 3, توهم الماء إن تيمم لفقده, having the impression that there may be water around if the cause of your tayammum was the absence of water. So let us go through these again. Those things which nullify the ablution. What nullifies the ablution? You can go back to the 4. No, we didn't do that in this lesson, but we did it in a previous lesson. Basically, those 4 factors that nullify the ablution. The same thing applies for the tayammum. So you just have to revise that lesson there, inshallah ta'ala. What are the 4 things? Anything that exits from the front or the rear private parts, touching a human private part with the insides of one's hands, touching the skin of a non-marriageable person of the opposite gender. And finally, it is loss of consciousness without the buttocks being firmly planted on the ground. Those are the 4 factors that breaks wudu in the Shafi'i school. So in addition to that, what also nullifies the tayammum are apostasy and number 3, which is thinking that there's water. This only applies if the reason you made tayammum was because of lack of water. So for example, you are living in a town. For some reason, there's maintenance on a particular day. They shut off the water. So there's no water in the town. Nobody knew about this. Nobody could really prepare. Or rather, it's not maintenance would be a bad example. A pipe burst and suddenly there's no water available. Now, in that instance, you may need to perform tayammum if there's no water around. Under that circumstance, you start praying and then you hear the sound of water running through pipes. And you think, oh, is the water on? Just the mere fact that you have an impression that there may be water because the reason for you performing tayammum was the absence of water, this breaks your tayammum and you have to go and check if there's water. So those are the factors that nullify the tayammum. And now we can quickly go through what is the sunnah way of performing tayammum. What's the sunnah way of performing a dry ablution? Number 1, begin in the name of Allah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Number 2, wipe the upper face before the lower. So go from the top down as opposed to from the bottom up. Wipe the right arm before the left arm. Then for wiping the arms, hold the palms up. Place the left hand crosswise under the right with the left hand's fingers touching the back of the fingers of the right. Oh, this is going to be an interesting one. For wiping the arms, hold the palms up, placing the left hand crosswise under the right with the left hand's fingers touching the back of the fingers of the right hand, passing the left hand up to the right wrist, then curling the fingers around the side of the right wrist. One passes the left hand to the right elbow, then turns the palm, the left palm so that it rests on the top. Okay, so I went the wrong way. So doing this and then that until it reaches the top, I think, of the right forearm with its thumb pointed away from one, the thumb pointed away from one before passing it back down to the wrist. So this was always a tricky one for me. I basically, look, this is like the absolute optimal. What I do is, I think I performed tayammum once in my life. I pass the hands like that and then like that. So I'm not sure if this is describing the same thing, but this is my method. So like that and like that. And then the other hand also like that, and like that. So that would be for the arms. So you can see there's a recommendation here. Go through it and see if you can get the mechanics of it correctly. But what is necessary is to wipe the arms with the dust. That's the integrals covers you. This is the optimum. طيب. And then number 5, one separates the fingers when striking the earth each of the 2 times, and one must remove one's ring for the second before wiping the arms. So make sure to separate your fingers and not have a ring on, especially for wiping the arms. So you separate the fingers when you strike the earth so that the dust can, of course, spread. And the reason for removing the ring is because it's going to be an impediment in terms of wiping the arms completely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. And then we proceed to the end where we summarize everything. So far, we've covered core objectives, contents, Islam and Iman, what it means to be mukallaf, then the istinja, how to perform ablution, looked at the types of water, the sunnahs of the body, the ghusl, the conditions of ablution, the acts forbidden without ablution, forbidden actions in the major state of, in the major and minor impure states and menses as well. And now we've also looked at the causes, the conditions, the integrals, and the nullifiers of tayammum. So in this lesson specifically, we've covered the forbidden actions in minor and major impure state, forbidden actions in menses, 3 causes of tayammum, 10 conditions of tayammum, 5 integrals of tayammum, and finally 3 nullifiers of tayammum. Until next time, inshallah, jazakumullahu khairan wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad, subhanallahi wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.